The room has not changed in decades, but time has carved its stillness into something heavier than silence. Dust hangs in faint lines, turning the dim air into a slow-moving haze, as if even the particles remember what happened here. The first 100 words must draw you in sharply, and they do because the space feels frozen in its final breath. A single overturned chair remains where it fell. A narrow window lets in a sliver of pale morning light. And on the wooden floor, faint outlines remain where investigators once knelt, tracing a story that refused to answer back. Her name was Mariel Knox, 28 years old, a quiet archival assistant who lived with an uncomplicated routine and few visitors. She loved cataloging old maps for the county office, handling the past with a patient, almost meditative care. In 1976, she walked home after her shift as she always did. She never arrived. Her absence went unnoticed for almost a full day, unusual for someone punctual, steady, and unfailingly present in her small circle. When officers entered this very cabin, deep behind a row of pecan trees in rural Georgia, they found the scene undisturbed except for the signs of one brief struggle. No neighbors heard anything. No one reported suspicious movement. Authorities mapped the place, documented it, photographed it, yet the narrative refused to offer answers. For years, the case sat dormant, becoming a silent emblem of uncertainty. Locals spoke of it occasionally, but even their memories blurred with time. Now the investigator, Elias Warren, older, slower, carrying the weight of his earlier years, steps inside again. He moves carefully, as if not to disturb the ghostly impression that still clings to the boards. His breath forms a faint cloud in the cool morning air. He switches on a small recorder, but hesitates to speak. The old habits of caution resurface. He treats every object with a reverence shaped by regret. He kneels where the outline is faintest. His gloved fingers hover above it, not quite touching. Time has muted the stains, but not their meaning. He inhales slowly. The smell is a blend of dust, wood rot, and old paper, reminiscent of forgotten file rooms. He remembers being here last, decades ago, young and certain he would solve everything. But cases do not bend to certainty. A single photograph remains pinned to the far wall. It shows Mariel at work in the archive office, smiling faintly, unaware that her image would someday anchor an unresolved tragedy. Elias examines it without lifting it from the pin. A small crease runs through the corner, a flaw he somehow never noticed in earlier years, and yet it tugs at him, like a quiet reminder that he may have overlooked far more than a folded edge. He pulls his notebook from his coat pocket. Pages flutter like dry leaves. He writes one line. Re-entering feels like returning to a question I abandoned. His handwriting looks smaller than it used to. He stops writing, letting the silence fill the space again. The past and present overlap in the dim room, forming a tension almost tangible. In this frozen scene, something waits, a neutral detail, a misread gesture, a subtle misplacement, something small enough to hide in plain sight. But that revelation belongs to another hour. For now, the unsolved murder remains a quiet presence, suspended between old errors and new intentions. 2. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. The reopening begins not with fanfare, but with a simple cardboard box slid across a metal table in the evidence vault. Elias stands over it, looking down at handwriting he recognizes from a former colleague who passed away years earlier. The label reads, Knox secondary items, logged late. He frowns because he remembers no secondary items. The case inventory had been fixed, complete, or so he believed. He opens the box slowly. The flaps release a faint exhale of stale air, carrying the scent of aged fiber and forgotten records. Inside is a sealed envelope, brittle at the edges. A small note rests on top, written in a shaky script. Found in cabinet during transfer. Not sure if filed before. Review carefully. Elias sits. The chair creaks. He keeps his hand steady as he removes the envelope, laying it on the table like a fragile artifact. When he tears along the edge, the sound is faint but sharp, slicing through the stillness of the room. Inside lies a single Polaroid photograph, one he has never seen. It shows the cabin exterior on the night of the original investigation. The porch light glows in the image, illuminating the doorframe. A figure stands near the edge of the frame, not clearly, just a silhouette blurred by motion or distance. But the posture, the tilt of the shoulders, the angle of the head, something about it feels deliberate. A timestamp sits in the lower corner. It reads 8/14/76, 21:52. Elias checks the old investigative timeline. The first responding deputy arrived at 22:10. That leaves an 18-minute gap. 18 minutes where someone was present, watching, or leaving. He exhales slowly. The paper between his fingers feels warmer than the room. The Polaroid, though grainy and ambiguous, carries weight, the weight of a detail that should not have gone unnoticed. It is not enough to identify anyone, but enough to demand attention. He places the photograph on the table, turning on the lamp overhead. Light falls sharply, enhancing the edges, the indistinct figure, the shadows cast along the porch. The more he studies it, the more he senses a quiet intention behind whoever stood there, a presence captured unintentionally by the camera's old flash. Another object remains in the envelope, a folded map of the surrounding woods with a single path marked in red pencil. The line curves around the creek, then bends toward the back of the cabin. Elias traces it with the tip of his pen, recalling that this route was never mentioned in any report. If someone approached from that direction, they would have bypassed the main road entirely. He writes another line in his notebook. New evidence reshapes old assumptions. A soft knock echoes from the far end of the vault. A younger officer pokes his head in. "Everything all right?" he asks. Elias answers, not quite a word, more a quiet acknowledgement. The officer nods and leaves, his footsteps fading down the hall. Left alone again, Elias lets the weight of the discovery settle. The case file has always been a closed door, but this new evidence acts like a small, unexpected hinge shifting under pressure. The timeline changes. The potential movement of suspects changes. The understanding of Mariel's final hours shifts from uncertain to freshly unstable. He studies the map again, stopping at the bend where the red line disappears into the woods. He imagines the path in darkness, the sound of gravel under cautious feet, the cool night wind drifting through the trees. Whoever walked that route carried a purpose, quiet, measured, determined. This is enough to reopen the case. Not publicly yet, but in the quiet machinery of investigative procedure. Elias signs the formal request for re-examination of stored materials. His hand trembles slightly at the final signature. The mechanical act of reopening a case feels almost routine, but something human lingers beneath the bureaucracy, a mixture of regret and obligation. Mariel Knox deserves more than an unresolved file. The past deserves the clarity that time denied. And Elias, carrying the weight of overlooked details, cannot walk away now. 3. Investigator examines past reports to identify overlooked details. The old reports arrive in stacked binders, their spines faded and their pages slightly curled from years of humidity. Elias clears his desk, creating a neat, rectangular space. The orderliness feels necessary, a boundary against the chaos of memory. He sets a recorder beside the binders, though he is unsure he will use it. Sometimes the sound of turning pages is enough to guide reflection. He begins with the first report filed the morning after Mariel's body was found. The writing is stiff, procedural, devoid of emotional inflection. He reads slowly, marking sections with small slips of paper. A few sentences draw his attention. Descriptions of shoe impressions outside the cabin, inconsistent measurements of the window latch, brief mentions of stray fibers that were never matched to anything. None of these details are new to him, but seeing them now in sequence, untouched by modern review, gives them renewed weight. He flips another page. A statement from a neighbor describes seeing a light near the back trees. The phrasing is vague, hesitant, possibly influenced by the stress of the night. At the time, investigators dismissed it as a reflection from a passing car. Elias considers that earlier conclusion now and finds it too convenient. As he continues through the binders, he notices another pattern, small contradictions between deputies' observations. One claims the cabin door was slightly open. Another writes that it was firmly shut. One notes a faint scent of burned matches. Another describes no scent at all. Individually, these discrepancies seem minor, the natural variance of perception. But collectively, they form a quiet discord. Then he finds something that halts his movement entirely, a small annotation in the margin of a later report. The handwriting is clean, sharp, unmistakably Mariel's. It appears on a page detailing her work records. She had written a single word beside the date of her final shift. Misplaced. Elias stares at it. The ink has faded, but not enough to diminish its clarity. He turns the page over, examining the back for additional markings, but there is nothing else, only that one word written with controlled pressure. Was it a note to herself about an archival item, or something broader? Was it even relevant? He searches through her employment records and finds no other similar annotations. Only this one. He rests his fingers on the edge of the page. The weight of guilt presses lightly, the kind that comes from realizing he ignored something that could have mattered, something so quiet it faded into background noise during the original investigation. He returns to the map found in the newly uncovered envelope. Holding it beside the annotated report, he wonders whether Mariel had noticed something missing at work, something she intended to retrieve or clarify. The timeline aligns too neatly to ignore. He leans back in his chair, letting his eyes close briefly. The sound of old paper shifting in the faint breeze from the desk fan fills the room. It is a soft, rhythmic whisper, steady, contemplative. Elias opens his eyes and continues reading, methodically comparing statements, timelines, and physical evidence logs. One detail after another emerges like faint stars in a clouded sky, small points that might eventually form a constellation. A hesitation in a coworker's statement. A mismatch in the time Mariel left the office. A repair request filed for the archive's backdoor 2 days before her disappearance. Individually, they feel too subtle to build upon. Together, they suggest something larger beneath the surface. A story obscured not by deception, but by the quiet imprecision of human recollection. Elias stops writing notes only when he realizes his pen has run out of ink. He replaces it, adding one final line before closing the binder. The past was not silent. I simply wasn't listening closely enough. He exhales, steady but weighted, and prepares for the next stage. The suspects who once stood under questioning, now waiting to be re-examined through the sharp, unforgiving lens of time. The list of names in the original file is short, but every line carries the weight of unresolved certainty. Elias spreads the profiles across his desk, forming a quiet landscape of faces, dates, and brief statements. The overhead lamp casts thin beams across the pages, turning each section into a vignette of someone once examined, then released into the long drift of time. He begins with Lowell Brandt, the maintenance worker who lived a half-mile from Mariel's route home. At the time, his proximity made him a natural focus. His record was clean, his demeanor cooperative. He had reported working late in the high school gymnasium the night Mariel vanished, fixing a faulty boiler. The school principal backed his claim. Still, inconsistencies linger. Slight variations in the times he provided on different occasions, and a nervous habit of adjusting his wristwatch while speaking, as if aligning time itself to match his version of events. Next is Sheila Doran, Mariel's co-worker in the archive office. Sheila and Mariel handled adjacent sections of the collection, exchanging brief, polite conversation during breaks. Their relationship, described by others, lacked conflict. Yet Sheila's statements included small hesitations when discussing Mariel's final project, the cataloging of land survey documents from a disputed property boundary. Sheila mentioned that Mariel seemed uneasy that week, though others did not confirm it. Her alibi, an evening church event with several attendees verifying her presence. Still, Elias notes the tension in her earlier taped interview, not guilt, but something quieter, harder to name. Then there is Thomas Redd, owner of a rural supply store Mariel occasionally visited. Thomas had been questioned due to a receipt found in Mariel's bag dated the afternoon before her disappearance. He claimed she stopped by for a small purchase, nothing more. His alibi was firm. He was hosting a repair service demonstration with a dozen witnesses. But the original investigators noted his guarded tone when asked about Mariel's personality. He described her as distant, though others saw her as reserved, never unfriendly. Elias wonders if the discrepancy came from perception or something else. Another profile stands out. Vernon Cate, a land surveyor whose name appeared in the same boundary dispute Mariel documented. His link to her came through work, not personal ties. Vernon had described their interaction as professional and brief. Yet the property disagreement involved substantial financial consequences for him. Mariel's role in organizing the official survey records might have influenced future claims. Vernon's alibi, a fishing trip with a friend, was accepted without challenge, but no physical evidence supported it. Elias arranges the suspects in a different order, grouping them by motive rather than chronology. He sketches a simple chart on a yellow pad. Personal connection, professional connection, proximity, opportunity. Lines form between names. Some cross faintly, others remain isolated. Motives vary: frustration, misunderstanding, anxiety, pressure. None stand out as definitive, yet each holds a loose thread worth pulling. He turns to the transcripts of past interviews. Dialogue flickers across the pages like distant echoes. She kept to herself. I barely knew her. We talked sometimes, nothing important. I don't remember the exact time. It was late, maybe earlier, I'm not sure. The hesitations are almost identical. Elias recognizes the patterns, the compressed memories of people who never anticipated that every minute would later matter. He reads slowly, annotating only the moments that stir unease. A mention of a car seen near the old trail behind the orchard. A brief comment about Mariel collecting old keys from the archive room. A statement from a passerby recalling someone carrying a bag near the creek path. A detail dismissed in the original report because the description was too vague. He pauses, lifting one transcript into clearer light. It belongs to Lowell Brandt. In the middle of his statement, Lowell mentions hearing something like a branch snap while walking home the previous evening. This detail never appeared in any other portion of his interview. It sits alone, an unconnected moment. Elias circles it, not because it proves anything, but because it reflects a small, authentic inconsistency, the kind that might point to forgotten clarity rather than deception. Mariel Knox, quiet, methodical, steady. Her life intersected with these individuals in ways that seemed trivial at the time. But the convergence of routine interactions can form complicated shapes beneath the surface. Elias steps away from the desk for a moment, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. The dim hum of the building fills the space, ventilation, the distant shuffle of files being moved, the faint clink of metal carts. It is the soundscape of an investigation waking after a long sleep. He returns to the suspects, studying the faces again. They are older now, lives extended beyond the shadow of the past. Time has changed them, but the truth of that night remains unchanged. Buried, perhaps, misunderstood, but not erased. He draws a final line at the bottom of his notes. Suspects are not defined by suspicion alone, only by what time exposes. The words steady him as he prepares to move deeper, into connections subtle enough to have escaped detection for nearly half a century. 5. Clues emerge slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. The clues do not arrive as revelations. They surface gradually, like faint shapes rising from still water. Elias begins by cross-referencing the new Polaroid photo with the original scene diagrams. The figure on the porch, blurred but present, stands at an angle partially shielded from the main road. The position suggests familiarity, not hesitation. Someone who knew the property's contours well. He overlays the map found in the envelope with older land registry documents. The red-marked path aligns precisely with a disputed access route from the boundary case Mariel had been working on. The trail passed behind several properties, including the home of Vernon Kate. That alone does not implicate him, but it ties the case to something more structural, a matter of land, ownership, and quiet tensions rather than sudden, personal conflict. Next, Elias revisits Sheila's interview. Her comment about Mariel appearing uneasy gains new weight when paired with Mariel's handwritten note, misplaced. What had been misplaced? A file, a document, something connected to the boundary dispute. Sheila's tone during the interview was measured, but Elias now senses a quiet restraint beneath her words, as if she held back something she wasn't certain mattered. He leans back, replaying an audio file from the archive. Sheila's voice comes through, fragmented, hesitating. Mariel, she said she needed to check something again. I didn't ask what. A faint shift in her tone follows, barely audible unless listened for with intention. It doesn't sound like fear, more like concern. Elias opens another binder. He searches for the inventory of documents Mariel had been organizing during her final week. Several entries relate to soil assessments, property markers, and historical boundary lines. One form stands out, a request for clarification dated 2 days before her disappearance. The signature is Mariel, but the handwriting near the bottom, noting a correction in measurement, is someone else. The initials appear to be LB. He compares them to Lowell Brandt's personnel forms, but the handwriting does not match. So who made the notation? He continues reviewing. Hours pass quietly. The overhead light grows warmer as the afternoon sun fades. Elias studies a detail he somehow missed before. The cabin's back door latch had been described differently by 2 deputies, but the one who claimed it was fully latched mentioned a small indentation near the metal fixture, as if someone had tried to secure it quickly. He recalls Sheila mentioning Mariel locking the archive room unusually early on the day she vanished. The parallel strikes him, 2 instances of hurried closing motions within hours of each other. He writes, "Actions reflect mindset. Closing doors quickly suggests urgency." Then something else catches him, a detail nearly overlooked. In the Polaroid, the porch light is on. The bulb casts a distinct outline along the doorframe, But according to the electrical inspection records from the case file, the cabin's power had been inconsistent due to a faulty fuse box. The question forms quietly. Why would the porch light be functioning at that specific moment if the cabin's power was unreliable? Someone must have replaced the fuse or repaired the connection shortly before the photo was taken. But who had access? And why would they fix a light before leaving the scene? As Elias pieces together these details, a subtle emotional pattern emerges. These were not the actions of a stranger passing by. They suggest someone attempting to maintain a sense of order, someone who preferred things controlled, predictable, familiar. Someone who responded to conflict not with aggression, but with quiet attempts to stabilize their surroundings. The inconsistencies in the suspect's statements gain new texture. Lowell's shifting times, Sheila's restrained concern, Vernon's evasive neutrality, Thomas's guarded descriptions. None point cleanly toward intent, but each holds a fragment of an emotional conflict, pressure from work, tension over property rights, frustration over misunderstood interactions, or quiet resentment disguised as routine. Then Elias finds something small, almost inconspicuous, a thin envelope tucked inside Mariel's personnel file. It contains a note she wrote to herself, folded twice. The edges are worn, the ink faint, the message short. Check again before final submission. No object is referenced, no name, no document, just that one line, a reminder shaped by caution. He closes his eyes briefly, listening to the steady hum of the office. Paper rustles softly as the desk fan shifts air across the room. The scent of aging reports mixes with the faint metallic trace of old staples. The sensory details become part of his concentration. When he opens his eyes, he understands something essential. The emotional conflict at the heart of the case is not about anger, rivalry, or sudden confrontation. It is about quiet pressure, the subtle weight of responsibility, fear of error, worry over consequences. Mariel Knox was careful. Someone else was anxious. Those two emotional states intersected at a fragile point. But Elias does not yet know who the anxious person was. Not yet. He writes his final note for the night. Conflicts don't always erupt. Sometimes they drift quietly into harm. He sets down his pen and lets the room fall into silence, sensing that the next steps will reshape the entire narrative and bring him closer to the one person who slipped through the investigation like a shadow. Morning arrives pale and muted, the kind of light that softens edges without warming them. Elias stands at the evidence board, the Polaroid pinned in the center, lines connecting documents like constellations waiting to be interpreted. He studies it again, not the porch light, not the path behind the cabin, not the timestamp, but the silhouette. Something finally aligns. The stance, the slight forward lean, the way one shoulder drops lower than the other. He turns to Sheila Doran's old employment photo, her posture unexpectedly similar, but the silhouette is masculine. He sets her photo aside. He scans the others. None match. He exhales, frustration forming a thin line between thought and acceptance. Then he remembers a detail buried in one of the earliest reports, the archive key return log. Only one key was still missing the night Mariel vanished. That key belonged not to Sheila, not to Lowell, not to Vernon, but to someone whose name had barely surfaced. Harold Denton, the quiet records clerk who assisted both Mariel and Sheila during high-volume cataloging months. His role was administrative, nearly invisible. He filed documents, replaced boxes, corrected typos in aging handwritten indexes. His name appeared only twice in the original case file, once in a log listing who accessed the archive storage room that week, and once in a routine list of employee schedules. No statement, no interview, no alibi ever taken. Not because he was cleared, but because he had submitted his resignation 3 days before Mariel disappeared. The original investigators categorized him as unrelated, assuming he had already left the department. Elias retrieves Harold's personnel file. The paper feels lighter than expected, thin, ordinary, unremarkable. Inside, he finds a transfer request stamped the same week Mariel submitted her note to check again before final submission. Harold had been responsible for reviewing the same disputed boundary documents Mariel worked on. The handwriting LB on the corrected measurement was not Lowell Brandt's. The initials were stylized differently. But Harold Denton's handwriting, signed at the bottom of his resignation form, matches the style. The same looping L, the same downward-sloping B, part of his middle initial, Benton. He examines another detail, a note written by Harold in the margin of a routine filing sheet, the letter M, written in a distinctive curved form. It matches the style in the correction on the land dispute file. Elias feels a slow, quiet pull of realization. The path marked in red pencil on the map. Harold had been responsible for mapping archive storage routes during reorganizations. The handwriting on the map matches his notations on older file labels. The evidence does not explode into clarity. It accumulates like drifting dust, joining into a shape one cannot ignore. Elias whispers to himself, barely audible. Harold. He retrieves the address listed in Harold's file, a modest home near the outskirts of town, close to the orchard trail noted in the early report. Elias and a responding officer arrive in the early afternoon. The air smells of pine and late-season grass. Harold answers the door slowly. He is older now, with silver hair and a calm, almost resigned expression. His eyes settle on Elias with quiet recognition. "You're here about her," he says softly, not a confession, but an acknowledgement of memory returning like a slow tide. Elias nods. "We need to talk." Harold steps aside, allowing them to enter. The house is orderly, almost too orderly, shelves aligned, papers stacked neatly, objects placed with careful intention. It mirrors the archive room, methodical and controlled. Elias observes him quietly. He waits for Harold to speak first. Minutes pass. The ticking of a small wall clock fills the stillness. Harold's voice emerges, low and hesitant. She found something, not big, just wrong. Elias remains silent. Harold continues, the words trembling more from regret than fear. "She noticed a measurement I corrected, thought it didn't match the record. She wanted to fix it before filing. I told her it was fine. She insisted on checking again." A quiet breath leaves him. "I followed her. Didn't mean for anything, didn't plan anything. I just needed her to stop. If she changed that document, it would have affected the claim. People depended on it. I thought she'd understand if we talked privately." Elias watches him closely, nodding the way Harold's hands tighten around each other. "She walked fast down the creek path. I called her name. She turned. She slipped. I reached for her arm. She panicked." He closes his eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen. It is not a dramatic confession. No raised voice. No sudden outpouring. Just the quiet collapse of a truth hidden for decades, simple, devastating, and logical. Harold swallows hard. "I didn't know what to do. I froze. Then everything moved too fast. The cabin was close. I thought maybe if I kept things still, ordered, maybe people wouldn't look too closely." He pulls out a box from a drawer. Inside is the missing archive key wrapped in a cloth, the red pencil used on the map, a single page from the disputed file, edges worn. Elias breathes in slowly, steadying himself. No sense of victory rises within him, only the calm weight of clarity settling after years of silence. Harold looks at the box, voice cracking into a whisper. Time didn't let me forget. The officers handcuff him with gentle restraint. He does not resist. As he is escorted out, he pauses on the porch. I never wanted harm, he murmurs, more to the fading afternoon light than to anyone present. Elias watches him go, his expression controlled, his thoughts heavy. The least suspected person, a quiet clerk who handled documents, not conflict, had become the unintentional force behind a tragedy shaped not by malice, but by fragile fear and misguided attempts to preserve order. The silence that follows feels almost like the cabin's silence years before, dim, still, built from mistakes no one recognized until too late. 7 ends with moral reflection. Truth isn't always visible on surface. Back at the precinct, Elias places the final pieces of evidence into a new file. The folder's weight feels different, not heavier, not lighter, just real. Authentic in a way the decades-old file never fully was. He sits alone in the dim office. Sunset filters through the blinds, casting thin lines of amber across his hands. The sounds in the building have quieted. Distant typing, a chair squeaking, a door clicking shut. Even these small sounds feel contemplative. He opens his notebook and reads the first line he wrote when he re-entered the cabin days ago. Re-entering feels like returning to a question I abandoned. The question is no longer abandoned, but the answer is not triumphant. He flips through his notes, the Polaroid, the map, Mariel's brief annotations, the contradictions in old statements, the overlooked connections. None of these clues were loud. None demanded attention. Each lived quietly in the margins, waiting for someone to see them with patience rather than urgency. Justice, he realizes, rarely resembles the sharp clarity people imagine. It moves slowly, methodically, shaped by persistence more than certainty. Mechanical at times, almost emotionless. Yet beneath the process lies something unmistakably human. The weight of lives intersecting, choices colliding, truths drifting beneath surface assumptions. Mariel Knox never sought conflict. Harold Denton never intended harm. Their lives crossed at one fragile moment where pressure, caution, and misunderstanding converged. Elias closes the file gently, aware that the conclusion offers no comfort, only clarity. The moral reflection settles in the room like dusk, settling over the old cabin in his memory. Truth isn't always visible on the surface. Sometimes it hides in small motions, subtle hesitations, quiet corrections, or a forgotten file in a box no one opened in time. He stands, turning off the lamp. The darkness folds in slowly. As he steps into the hallway, he carries not triumph, but an understanding that justice is often imperfect, a careful reconstruction built from fragments, mechanical in process, human in consequence. The case is solved, the lines are connected, the narrative complete. But something human remains unresolved. The enduring awareness that answers, once uncovered, cannot restore what was lost. They can only illuminate the faint shapes left behind, lingering like dust in a long-forgotten room where time once stood still.